Hey, 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 hey. Oh, I'm so happy to see everybody. Well, so happy to be here. I don't really get to see anybody back through the computer screen like this, but I'm thrilled to be here. So, hello and good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is in your neck of the woods, whenever you do happen to see this. It is morning where I am, though, or midday, practically. Haven't had breakfast, but have had a delicious cup of Joe with a personality. I love this cup because it's just like goofy, and it works for me. So hey, why not? Um, I just got on because I was sort of sobbing through a message that I recorded for a friend. Um, and so it brought up something for me that I wanted to speak about. Hmm, interesting. So when we make choices, when we make decisions, well, we're taught to make decisions. But what if we didn't make decisions? What if we would allow ourselves to choose? So, how often are we not allowing ourselves to choose based on decisions that we've already made? How often have we already concluded ourselves, concluded joy, concluded choices out of our lives because of certain stories that we're holding on to, certain quote unquote truths that we've bought, certain um, facts that we've assumed are real? Well, if you look at the word assume, and most of us happen to function from underlying assumptions, but most of what we quote unquote assume is to make an ass out of you and me. If you spell the words out, um, you look at the word and you can divvy it, put in two lines there, and you can see you make an ass out of you and me. And most of us tend to live our lives through these assumptions, never ever questioning them, never ever doubting them, actually constantly doubting ourselves, right, in favor of those points of view that we hold on to as being so real and true. But are they? And this is what's been so interesting for me because I've seen how often we give our dreams up in favor of these supposed truths, these assumptions. We give ourselves up and we forget to wonder. It's really interesting how often we've excluded what we desired out of our lives because we've assumed we can't have it. How often have we excluded fun, joy, wondering, creation because we've assumed that we either don't have the resources, we don't have the money, it doesn't look like it's going to show up. If it were going to show up, then something different would have to happen. So hi Neil. So I was writing a friend who was going through something that I went through a few years ago when a friend reached out to me. So in 2016, we were going through a really rough financial patch. Um, every time I've stopped choosing, it's funny how our world would just kind of collapse. And financially, our world was collapsing. And I did not have the funds to renew my facilitator license. And so I chose to extend it for a few months, from one training from Costa Rica to Australia, I think it was. And then I just said, no, I'm not going to renew it. I'm actually going to step away from access. I'm going to step away from everything. I'm just going to pause, go within, and look to see what's going to work for me. I'm going to start asking questions and see what's going to create the greatest change. And it was tough. It was tough. But one of the things that I got is that you may take a person out of access, in my case, yeah, but you can't take access out of the person. Because once you have these tools, they kind of they they permeate and they become part of your life and living regularly. And it's absolutely beautiful. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of people will tell you, oh, as soon as I chose the tools of access, my life just became ease, joy, and glory with everything. Well, some of us get it really quickly, and some of us don't necessarily, or some of us require all sorts of obstacles or whatever other things. And so I required that little rough patch to see how much my choice really does create. And it was interesting because I felt like I had lost my identity by no longer being any sort of facilitator for access. I was just Rachel. And it was such a gift. It ended up being like 5 months, I guess, something like that, where I wasn't facilitating. I went within, and I read all sorts of things, and I enjoyed all sorts of things, and I asked all sorts of questions. And it was a really cool incubating space that my friend tapped into and reached out and started asking me questions, because I said, I don't have the funds to be able to make it to the next facilitator class either. And so it doesn't look like I'm going to be a certified facilitator at all again. And she asked me, how many conclusions do you have there? And see, that's what I was saying about the assumptions. We don't even realize that these conclusions are there. They're there, they're subtle, they're there, but we don't even recognize them. And whenever we are living as a conclusion, as an answer, as this is just the way it is, we're not we're not engaging with the universe, with the molecules of everything that's around us. And yeah, we're doing ask and you shall receive, but we're asking for pain, suffering, and glory, and we're not willing to have the ease and the joy of possibilities that we could have had we actually asked or wondered anything. And so my friend Bhagyalakshmi Murali in India reached out. I don't remember how she reached out, but she knew I was in a dark place. And I've never met her personally, just on Facebook, etc. But she perceived that I required a shoulder. And she reached out, and I'm so grateful to her. She reached out and said, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, I think the facilitator class was supposedly coming up like uh, in a month, and I didn't have the funds for it. And I wondered, what to do, how to do. I'd like to be a facilitator, but what am I going to do?" And it was fascinating. She reached out and she said, "Well, have you been wondering?" Wondering is very different than assuming, than concluding, than answering. Hi, Margarita. Hi, Neil. It's good to see y'all. So it was fascinating because I hadn't realized in my dark dismay, I was going into those assumptions, those conclusions, those answers, and I just shoved away any wondering whatsoever. And she said she had gone through something similar as well, and then just began to wonder, what would it be like if she would be in class? What would it be like to see the people who are there? What would it be like, oh my goodness, and in this day and age with all the social distancing, what would it be like to hug them? What would it be like to go to lunch with them, to have conversations with them, to experience sitting in a big room with all the people that are there, to enjoy a class that at that time was being facilitated by Gary and Dane. Now it's being facilitated by Gary and Dane and Simone and Brendan, the four of them together, which is really cool. But what would it be like? Like actually, like wonder, not the, oh, I'm going to stay at this hotel and I'm going to eat this kind of food, and that, just the feel. What would Rome be like in March of 2017? And I knew I wasn't supposed to be able to go to this because we had very, very limited funds, and we were going on a family reunion trip to Israel because my niece was getting married. And so we were committed to that ever since my and we were getting help to go on the trip. And ever since my mother-in-law passed away in 2012, every year or 2 years, we have some sort of family get-together somewhere. And in that particular year, it was in Israel. And so we knew we were going, but we couldn't have both Israel and me going to Rome. It just didn't work. Supposedly, assumption, right? But when you begin to wonder, when you begin to ask questions, it's amazing what can show up. So I began to wonder, as my friend Bhagya Lakshmi asked me. And she asked me a simple question: what would the world be like if you choose to renew your license? And what would the world be like if you didn't choose to renew your license? And it was so much lighter when I would ask. I would ask traditionally in access classes. We say, what would my life be like in 5 years if I choose this? But you know what? The 5 years for me personally wasn't a long enough stretch, because I was still going to all of this head stuff and to having to figure anything and everything out, and all the hows, those cursed hows, and figure out all the steps along the way. But I didn't have to do any of that. It was so cool because I just began to ask. So I said, I know I'm going to Israel. We were getting the flights and stuff to Israel. What would it be like if I were able to go to this training? What would the world be like in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, 50 years, 500 years, if I choose to go to Rome for this certified facilitator training? If I choose to renew my license, and if I didn't choose to renew my license, what would the world be like in the next 10 years, 50 years, 500 years? And it was so light and so clear to renew my license rather than not. And so I just began to wonder, like Bhagya Lakshmi suggested, just wonder. So I just wondered, what would it be like to be in Rome? I hadn't been, well, I don't think I had been to Rome before. I'd been to Italy many times before, but not Rome specifically. I'd been further north. But I wondered, what would it be like? What would it be like to hear Italian again? What would it be like to, hop into a pizzeria for lunch or something? What would it be like to be sitting in a class where, I was used to going to the facilitator training in Costa Rica? And that's okay, but it was just English and Spanish for the most part, some Portuguese, but it was mostly, English and Spanish. And here it'd be going into a place where there are so many languages being translated all at once. What would that be like? It was like the most international of all the trainings. And I thought, wow, wouldn't that be awesome? So we started looking at things. My husband had looked at airplane tickets. And it was funny because all the deals, the good deals, the financially, obviously economy, sardine class, whatever, but the only inexpensive tickets led through Rome. So anyway, we were going to Israel, all roads led to Rome. And it was so funny. That's where my class was going to be. And the universe was having my back. I wondered. And all tickets led through Rome. So, okay, I'd have to figure out how to pay for the class. Got a little help, but I gathered everything that I could. I asked and asked and asked and asked and created, like by the hair on my chinny chin chin kind of thing, barely made it, but I gathered what I needed for the class. The ticket was going to go through Rome anyway, even to Israel, but there would just be a pause in Rome for a few days. And I managed to create an Airbnb with, gracias. Siempre es buenísimo aprender más, pero si empiezas a escuchar no solo desde las orejas, pero percibir la energía, quizás esto puede contribuir también, Nancy. So the thing is with the wondering was so intense in my world, not intense like that, but just constant. Like I wondered, what would it be like? What would it be like to share an Airbnb with more friends? Somehow within the month, I had it. We had the ticket, we had a space. I was going to the class. I stood there, man, at the registration table paying, with small bills, counting out everything to be able to pay for the class. But I did it. I did it. And it wasn't because of a have to. And it wasn't because I concluded it out, but because I listened to my friend and I began to wonder. I began to actually use the damn tools that I was facilitating that I'd forgotten to use because I was so accustomed to the assumptions, right, and the conclusions rather than the wondering. And when you wonder, when you just include a bit of wonder in your world, it is amazing what can begin to show up. So what would it be like for you in everything that you're doing in your day-to-day if you began to wonder? What would it be like? But notice also when you're wondering not to conclude something specific. I was just reading today, because I'm reading for the fun of it. I was just reading today this book, The Little Black Book on Relationships by Dr. Casey Crisp. And I was reading the first chapter where she speaks about how she gets together with David Caddy, her husband. If anybody follows Access, you guys probably know Casey and David. Just how they got together, how they began their journey. And there are also not too many expectations there. So what if you'd allow yourself to step out of the not so great expectations that end up creating a lot of misery, a lot of frustration, a lot of sadness in your world, and actually allow yourself the space of possibilities that is the question and the wondering, and truly just begin exploring. If I had no fixed point of view here, if I had no underlying assumption here, if I knew not this that I've assumed, what else would be possible? What else could I see? What else could I experience? And the thing that I love about the wondering, and something that came up in the book as well, I noticed that in the book, Casey knew that she was going for, a summer workshop or a summer whatever, and she just wanted to enjoy the experience, and she was focused on chiropractic college, etc. She wasn't fixated on having a relationship. And it was at that time where she was just like at ease, and she's going after her thing and she's doing her stuff, that the relationship kind of dropped in. And the same thing with a facilitator class that I was attending, that I was choosing, that I was creating by my choice. Because that's the thing. We keep thinking that only when outside circumstances are perfect or are exactly the way that we'd like, when everything falls in place, when all those ducks are finally in a row. Have you ever seen ducks in a fucking row? They kind of wiggle waggle everywhere. They might follow their mom when they're crossing the street, but then, just first sight of water and those duckies are everywhere. And thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. So it's fun to be able to just explore. See, my ducks just went out. But when you, I love being distracted. I love allowing myself to be distracted, is it is part of the gift for me of wondering, because my mind does not work on a single track. It works on multiples, like all at the same time. And in some situations, it may be difficult to put words together as one thought, but I can see so many patterns and so many things that are going on everywhere. So when I asked the questions, and when I began wondering about facilitating, and when I began exploring, if I know not this, what else is possible? The universe began to conspire with me. Things, like the flights. Cheapest flight was through Rome. Like friends that had suggested, hey, want to join us at an Airbnb? It was such a gift to be able to play with them. Such a gift to be able to join them. Such a gift to be able to explore and wonder in a different way. Nothing ever shows up the way we think, just because we assume that it has to show up in one specific way. What if it doesn't? What if actually the greatest, most amazing experiences and surprises and everything else show up when you begin to wonder? What if nothing has to look the way you think it does, and everything can begin to unfold from your very wondering? So I love that. I love the messiness of it all, you know? I love that it doesn't have to be linear. I love that it begins to whisper when you begin to ask. When you don't ask, there's no whispering back. There's no inviting you to play in the world. Everything just kind of shuts down. Doors close, possibilities kind of out. Because what's missing is your engagement, your ask, your joy, your wondering. So what would you be wondering about now? What would you like to add to your life? What would you enjoy creating in the world? I love that each of us is so uniquely different. Our experiences are so uniquely different. Our flavors are so uniquely different. Our ways of even explaining the same tool are so unique and different. And it shows me that each one of us is a miracle walking, and each one of us actually being willing to step into all of that, being willing to claim and own that, changes everything. Changes everything and invites the world to possibilities. So when I asked about whether or not to renew my facilitator license, then at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, rather than just, done, I'm not being that anymore, I perceived a whole different world. I perceived the lighter world, a happier world. And I don't necessarily know everyone who listens to any of these recordings, and maybe nobody does. I don't know if anybody shares them. That's okay. If something touches someone, if someone is delighted by something or inspired by something, and the way they look at the world changes, that ripples out to other people too. So to me, that's being a gift. Being you is being a gift. And the more you're willing to be you and just show up, just you've no idea how far that reaches, but what a gift it can be. I mean, look, I'm telling you my story. I was reading Casey's story earlier. What are you adding to the world? See all those assumptions? Nowadays in Access Speak, they're talking about myths and archetypes. They're just stories. They're just points of view. They're just underlying assumptions that make an ass out of you and me because we happen to believe a story or a point of view which isn't true. It isn't the breadth and the expanse of you as an infinite being. It's just a moment in time. It's a thought that you might have held on to a little bit too long, but it isn't who you be. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are not those emotions. You are not any definition that you have of yourself. And no door is closed until you choose to shut it. So what could you be wondering about today? And I wonder what future of greater possibilities it would create, not just for you. And that's what I love. We live in a world where we're all like interconnected. I make a choice, it affects somebody else. A butterfly flaps their wings, that affects something else. We're not alone. We think we're alone when we're holding on to those thoughts, but we're not alone. So what can you be wondering about that will create a different world? I wonder. Thank you. And if this inspires you, do feel free to share. And if it doesn't, that's great too. But just keep wondering. I wonder what else is possible we've never considered.